Hey guys, this is actually going to be our last lecture of the year. When we started the year, I never imagined the year ending like this, but here we are. A quick note, so this is not the end. There will be a small assignment next week. It'll just be a little assignment and it won't take you very long, but this is our last week of major content. Um, so this week your assignment will be just like it has been for the last couple of weeks. You'll have some lecture questions, you'll have some USA test prep, and then you will have our last summative assignment. The good news is the summative assignment this week is a multiple choice, and there's only 10 questions, so trying to ease up on you guys a little bit. This week we're going to talk about relationships. It's one of my favorite concepts because in biology, there's a lot that we can talk about plants and animals, but on your standards we don't actually get to talk about that many. Hopefully next year in environmental science we'll be able to cover some more. But it is exciting for me because I love plants and animals and I love their relationships and how they interact, and so this is one of my absolute favorite lessons to teach. So we're going to talk about predation, competition, and symbiosis. So why do organisms even interact at all? Why don't we just all go about our business? And the reason for that is because within an environment, there are limited resources to be used. So as we get the things that we need from our environment, we are naturally going to interact with living organisms. Many organisms share a habitat. A habitat is the actual area in the ecosystem where an organism lives, including all of its abiotic and biotic resources. So in a way, we can think of our household as a habitat. This is an area, especially here lately, where we're spending an awful lot of time. It has abiotic and biotic resources, so you might have house plants, you might have a dog, those would be biotic things. Abiotic things would be your furniture or your bed, and so these all come together to form your habitat. Each organism has a unique niche, and some people say niche. I actually prefer niche. I feel like niche sounds strange, but it really just depends on who you ask, so really both are correct. And so a niche is all of the things an organism does within its habitat. And so niche is individual to the organism. So for example, in my house, I live in my house with my husband. We have 2 house cats, and then we live on a farm, so we have a lot of animals outside. We've got horses and chickens and ducks and goats, and sure I'm forgetting somebody, but we have a lot of animals. But each particular organism that lives in this habitat of our house has a job. So for example, I'm really in charge of all of the living things. I care for all of the animals. I make sure that all of their medical care is up to date. I trim their hooves, all of this good stuff. My husband, on the other hand, he is in charge of all of the landscaping things. So he mows the lawn and he takes care of the outside of the house, you know, a lot of the other kind of outdoor things for which he's responsible. And then, you know, for example, our cats inside the house have the role of supreme leader and attention seeker. And that's just kidding, of course, but that's their niche. So everybody has a particular niche. It's important to recognize that no 2 creatures can fill the same niche, and we'll see why that's important. So the first relationship we'll talk about is predation, and this is kind of like the most exciting one. And if we were in class, I have a lot of really great, exciting predation videos of really cool ways that animals consume other animals. But predation in its simplest form is when one animal kills and eats the other one for food. The predator is the organism who is hunting or killing, and the prey is the organism that is consumed. Examples for us as humans, many of you may be hunters or have gone hunting with your parents, and we hunt for things like deer and ducks. So in that scenario, we of course would be the predator and the prey would be the deer or ducks. There are a lot of other different examples for different organisms, but you get the idea. Competition is a little bit different than predation. So competition is a relationship that exists between 2 or more organisms that are fighting for the same limited resource. Competition has 2 forms. Interspecific competition. So this is where competition is occurring between different species. And we can remember that because international, they both start with inter. International is many different nations competing. So that would be different countries competing in a soccer match. And so interspecific competition in animals would be if cheetahs and lions were competing to eat from the same herd of elk. So there are 2 different species competing for the same elk. The flip side of that is intra-specific competition. So that's intra, it also sounds like the word intramural. When you guys go to college, you may be involved in intramural sports. So while International sports would be different countries playing soccer together. Intramural would be students all from the same school breaking into teams and playing against each other. So in the animal kingdom, an example would be 3 different lions trying to eat the same elk. So they're all the same species, they're just different individuals competing for the same resource. We're going to talk about the competitive exclusion principle. So no 2 organisms can occupy the same niche at the same time. If the organisms are very different, one is probably a better fit than the other. So getting back to the cheetah and the lion, if the prey that they are competing for and the food source that they are competing for is something that runs very fast, perhaps the cheetah would be better suited for that environment. And so therefore, it would competitively exclude the lion from being the best at that, and therefore the lion would have to move on and find another food source. If the 2 organisms are similar, it would take a fight to see who would win. The loser will have to find a different niche to occupy. So again, this would be like my favorite example, The Lion King. So many of you, I have not seen the new one, but even the old animated version, we watch as Scar and Mufasa are competing to be the leader of the pride. Scar does some shady stuff and gets Mufasa killed, and then he's in charge. Well, then when Simba grows up, he returns to Pride Rock and he fights his uncle Scar to regain his rightful ownership of the pride. So that would be an example of competitive exclusion. Only one of those lions could be king. There could be only one, and there was that kind of constant turmoil to figure out who that would be. Symbiosis. So that's an interaction that involves a close physical long-term relationship between 2 species. One species always benefits, and they're always interspecific. So it's always between 2 different species. So we do not refer to relationships of organisms of the same species as symbiosis. So this is two different species that are interacting. First example of a symbiotic relationship. So we're going to back up a little bit and say that, unfortunately, because I'm recording, but at least one party benefits. Both parties do not always benefit. So parasitism. This is a really disgusting picture, and I always get a lot of ooh when I put this up there. That is a dog, and the dog's ear is full of ticks. And so this is parasitism. One organism or a parasite benefits from the relationship, while the other organism, the host, is harmed. So obviously, in the case of the tick is feeding off the dog's blood. The dog gets no benefit from that. They get itchy, they get uncomfortable, they can get anemic. Really a not good situation for the dog. Another example would be a cat that had fleas. Fleas would be considered parasites. Different kinds of worms. So depending on what kind of animals you have in your house or on your property, you have to worm them for different things. Those are parasites. So here's our poor flea-ridden kitty here. Okay, so it is crucial in a parasitic relationship that the parasite doesn't kill the host. Now, let's pause and think for a minute about why that would be. Why would they not want to kill the host? Because in order for this relationship to be successful, for the relationship to persist, each population must not have a devastating effect on the other. So if the parasite were to kill its host, it will no longer have either a food source or a way to get around or a means by which it is useful for it to reproduce. And so basically the host has to live long enough for it to fulfill its goal and to move on and for the parasite to reproduce. So it wants to, it's okay if it makes the host a little sick, but it doesn't want to kill it because then that would be wouldn't be beneficial to the parasite. So the parasite must allow the host to live long enough for the parasite to survive and spread. Commensalism. So this is kind of a neutral relationship. So this is where one organism is benefited while the other one is unaffected, neither benefited nor harmed. So an example for this is these bivalves. These are probably mussels that are in this picture, or sometimes clams, different kinds of any bivalve is anything that closes and opens like this. And we can see that the little sort of crusty looking dudes on there, those are barnacles. And so the barnacles benefit by attaching to the mollusks because they are able to be moved around. But the mollusk isn't really affected one way or the other. They're just kind of there. It doesn't slow it down any. It doesn't bother it at all. So that would be an example of commensalism. Mutualism is the last relationship. So mutualism is where both animals benefit. And so here we have our little Nemo fish, our little clownfish is inside an anemone. And that word is very hard to say. So both organisms involved benefit. It helps both of the organisms to survive. And so here in our example, the clownfish and the anemone both benefit from this relationship. So if you know anything about anemones, they actually have very powerful stinging potential. And so the clownfish is actually evolved to be immune to this. And so the clownfish is able to take shelter in the anemone and is therefore protected by this. So what does the anemone get out of this relationship? Well, the clownfish, as it's eating, when it's coming retreating back into the anemone, there's little microscopic particles that are left over from the food that the anemone can feed on. And more importantly than that, the clownfish also cleans the anemone. So they both benefit from the relationship, and therefore it is mutualism. So that was a very, very short presentation on relationships. So you guys will do a little bit more practice in the questions, and then for your summative assessment, feel free to refer back to this slideshow presentation as you were doing that. And I hope that you guys have a great summer. I will probably not do another video lecture, so we probably will not see each other again. But it has been my distinct pleasure to be your science teacher. I look forward to seeing all of you next year. There have been a few people who have asked who will be their teacher for next year, and the answer is I'm not sure, because you are no longer going to be broken up by grade level. Everybody in this high school is taking environmental science next year. It's going to be kind of a unique year to get everybody on the same page. So you may be in classes with people of different grade levels, and therefore it's impossible to tell which teacher is going to teach which section. But I will have the pleasure of teaching some of you next year, I am sure. If not, my door is always open. Please feel free to contact me with any questions at any time, either by email or remind, or just come by my classroom and say, hey, Ms. Warren, I have a question about this. I hope you all have a great summer. Hopefully maybe I'll see some of you around town. And if not, I will see you next year. Bye.